Oh, you're back. That was fast.
I don't know what happened there. Sorry. Okay, so we're just gonna get started. I'm gonna start with introductions, and hopefully we'll get Yaritza on by then. So we have a really exciting, great panel today. The session is called "Turning the Tide on Fossil Fuels," and I'll just a little bit context. So the Latino, Latinx communities are disproportionately impacted by fossil fuel extraction, including oil drilling, affecting the health and safety of frontline neighborhoods. While the Biden administration is pushing forward a climate package that includes some investments toward capping and remediating oil wells and transitioning toward a clean energy future, rapid and massive change is needed to protect public health and curb climate change. Communities on the ground have been leading the charge in this fight for decades. During this summit session, you will hear from frontline activists in California, Florida, Colorado, and Texas, working to demand change at the local, regional, and national levels, demonstrating the devastating impacts that oil drilling and extraction has had on frontline communities and the grassroots action it's taking to turn the tide. We will also discuss opportunities for oil workers transitioning away from fossil fuel jobs through a just transition. So I am very happy to introduce Paula Torrado. She's from Physicians for Social Responsibility in Los Angeles. We have Elida Castillo from League of Conservation Voters, Chispa Texas. And then we have Yaritza Perez from Moms Clean Air Force. Hopefully she will be joining. And I see Yaritza's on now, yay. And then our fabulous moderator, the one and only Ian Tafoya, who has been doing an amazing job moderating all day. And he's with the Colorado State Program for Green Latinos. So I'll hand it over now to Ian.
Well, thank you so much for that, Elena. This is such a critical and an important conversation that we're engaged in here. You know, our work, I know, brings all of us across the regions that we live in, and it's a difficult conversation at times between regulations that are intent on capping emissions or reducing leaking emissions and a larger conversation about keeping it in the ground. And so I'm hoping today you're going to hear some insight from all these great Green Latinos members about what is happening in each of those communities. And so our first question is really about the fact that you all are fighters. We know that. That's why we brought you here today. And that you're fighting to protect your communities from fossil fuels that manifest in public health problems and exacerbating climate disasters. And we wanted to just take a moment for you to narrow in on maybe one campaign that you're working on that is impacting this effort that you'd like to share with members from across the country. So Paula, how about we start with you?
Yes, absolutely. Thank you so much for having me here. And I think this is, as you said, this conversation is so important, and it's crucial for the next transition of clean production and green jobs. But I want to specifically talk about Physicians for Social Responsibility Los Angeles Stand LA campaign, which stands for Standing Together Against Neighborhood Oil Drilling in Los Angeles. And I wanted to give a quick little background about oil in LA and a case of environmental racism, and how Los Angeles is home to the largest urban oil field in the United States. And that's due to decades of redlining, environmental racism, and indifference of elected officials. The majority of these oil fields are situated in low-income Black and Latinx communities from South Los Angeles all the way to Wilmington. And these frontline communities are paying the true cost of air pollution and the greed of oil companies. Over 200,000 Angelinos live within a half a mile, 2,500 feet from oil drilling, and 69% of people are living next to oil wells, and those are not white people. And there is an overwhelming amount of scientific evidence that confirms that oil drilling is incompatible with healthy and sustainable neighborhoods, and the chemicals emitted by oil drilling can cause nosebleeds, headaches, chronic disease, etc. And we saw how during the pandemic, Angelinos were facing two compounding health crises: the COVID-19 pandemic and the oil drilling crisis. And mixed together, it was destroying the lungs of Los Angelinos. And for decades, the oil industry has profited off of polluting in LA. And this is the ambitious charge and mission of the Stand LA campaign, which is pushing for the full transition for the complete phase out of oil drilling in neighborhoods. And as we continue with that campaign, which is started with pushing for the 3,200 feet setback from oil drillings and sensitive receptors, now it's a complete phase out. We see how the city council of the city of Los Angeles has now an opportunity to set precedent by righting the wrongdoings of broken regulatory systems that resulted in environmental racism and protect the health of those that are most vulnerable. So now Stand Delay is working to move towards this complete phase out that can create good jobs and opportunities for communities and workers to live, work, and play and pray in communities that are healthier. I wanted to mention that because of this campaign, Stand Delay, in December of 2022, Los Angeles City Council Energy, Climate Change, and Environmental Justice Committee moved to begin a citywide phase out of oil drilling. And if this motion moves forward, and the city attorney can begin developing an ordinance that can completely phase out oil wells in the city, and this will be a watershed moment in the city's climate and environmental justice leadership. So that's the Stand Delay campaign, and that's the main work that we're doing in PSRLA around fossil fuels.
Would you like to go next, Lita?
Yes, thank you, Paula, for the information you shared. I wish I could narrow it down. Like, we have several different campaigns, combating LNG build out and exportation of crude oil, plastics facilities that are going up, steel facilities, and there's just a lot of, the Corpus Christi area and the Coastal Bend area is ground zero for the fossil fuel industry in Texas. And, our port likes to say it's the largest energy exporter in the world, in the nation. And at the same time, they try to talk about sustainability. So right now, one of our big fights is against desalination in our area, just because water is such it's a commodity. And right now they want to build 4 desalination plants in a closed bay system so that they can use this to then try to pursue more fossil fuel industries to come to the area, and that they can provide water for them. And then also they're trying to sell it to the public like this water is meant for us. It's for residents because we are in a drought prone area. We're going to need water. And so they're selling it to the public like they need an uninterrupted supply of water, at the same time permitting a plastics plant that takes 20 million gallons of water per day. So for us, our fight is against desal, because this is the gateway. Like, if we stop this, then we could stop potential industrial build out in the area. So lots of issues, but desal, it's a big one.
That intersection that you're talking about with water is so crucial. And we've done some investigations here in Colorado with Green Latinos Colorado on what are the water rates that people are paying? Are they equivalent to what others are paying? The water is unusable at the end, but here in New Mexico, Colorado, there's this whole conversations about allowing that fracked water to be called life and be labeled for those uses again. And it's incredibly disheartening. I grew up in a community where I could see was a coal burning plant transition to a frack gas plant from my mother's front yard. And it's across the street from the only refinery in Colorado. And so a lot of, our advocacy around oil and gas in Colorado, or in the neighborhood I grew up in, has been subject to this refinery, where we've been able to pass critical air toxics legislation to require reverse 911, stronger emergency plans, fence line monitoring that's real time and warnings for the community. We've even used settlement dollars against this refinery to get our own community-based monitoring. We've targeted them on water permits. We've even sued them in court to try to get these permits moved up. But again, that's not the closure that our community has been seeking. And so the fuel that's processed in our refinery, it comes all the way from Canada, tar sands, Texas, wells terminate and come here to Colorado to be processed. And so we know we need to keep it in the ground. So activists, I got a chance to work with activists who try to bring a charter amendment. Right before the pandemic, we filed a charter amendment to ban all fossil fuel extraction in our county. And not only could you not drill in our county, you couldn't horizontally drill into our county, and you couldn't store toxic water or any other chemicals that you would use within our community. We were derailed by COVID, and I think we'll probably try to come back. But one exciting piece of news we did receive was at our airport, which is just on the rural kind of end of Denver. They've agreed to close up all of their wells, and they had more than 70 wells. And that was the only active drilling that was happening in our community at the time. Now, it doesn't equal the same protections as the encroaching oil and gas comes our way, but it's a critical step, I think, being signaled from our leaders that we're going to keep it in the ground. So, Yorita, so great to have you join us. I hope it's working well now. We're just in the beginning talking about campaigns we're working on. I know so many cool things in Florida happening, from keeping it an offshore drilling out to whatever else you're working on. I can't wait to hear. Oh, no, we can't hear you. Your audio is just muted. Still looks muted on my screen. Maybe our tech team is unable to mute from their side. We'll just give them a moment to give it a try. Gosh, Yorita, I'm so sorry. It's great to see you on here. I wish I could read lips. I can't. But we're going to, hopefully our tech will work it out and we'll get back to you. We're going to do our best to make that happen. So the next question that we had is, as the movement is progressing from transitioning away from fossil fuel dependency, it's been full of obstacles. What kind of hurdles are you facing with your organization and your campaigns, and how have you managed them? This is so critical, because working through the hard parts is what we all have to do in our jobs if we want to see victory. And I'm really hoping that we can share some wisdom from you to our members. Alita, should we start with you this time? We'll flip the order.
Sure. Well, you mentioned a big one. Both of y'all did. COVID has been a big obstacle in our communities, just because we're not able to have like those face-to-face conversations or group, large group settings, as usual. And so it's really impacted the work, but it's also helped us think of different ways that we can reach our communities, either through social media, having Zoom trainings and things of that nature. And then also another thing that has impacted the work is having no support from our political leaders. It doesn't matter what the letter is behind their name here in Texas, especially in our area. Like, the fossil fuel is who they listen to, like the fossil fuel corporations. So for us, it's really helping us to identify, like, what is our agenda, especially in 2022. Like, what is it that we're going to do so that we can get, the attention of those who are the decision makers in our community. So what we see as a hurdle, it's just, COVID kind of restricting our ability to speak with the community, but then it's also helped us come up with like different initiatives of how we're going to have these conversations. And so we had trainings through Zoom, and we had the ability to educate our community on what desalination is, what's happening to the area, and how it's affecting them. And because we had these conversations, we were able to hear from folks who are helping to do the work. And unfortunately, a lot of that was in scientific terms, and it wasn't in the terms that the community understands. It wasn't like about the heart. It wasn't about like the health of the community. And so what we're able to do is kind of like, hash out that conversation with community, like, and bring it down to their level and how they are personally affected by these things. So we were hearing the conversations that the folks in the communities had, and how they were kind of like dispersing this information. And then we kind of like looked at it and we're like, okay, this isn't working. We need to have these heart-to-heart conversations with community. And we were able to have that through Zoom, which in turn helped us have like turnout to some of these hearings that we had for desal and other things that the Texas Commission on Environmental Quality was having. So where they were used to having like maybe 20 participants, we had about like 90 participants on a call. So it was like pretty amazing. But we're hoping COVID numbers go down, but we're not going to let those stop us, because I think we've used too many excuses on barriers in the past of like, oh, we can't do this, or they're not listening. But it's because we weren't talking to the people, we weren't engaging them, and we weren't listening to them. So listening to our community is really what's helping us like overcome a lot of these hurdles and giving them the information that's important to them in language that's important, that they understand.
Well, I couldn't agree with you more that COVID and Zooms created a whole new layer of work that we all had to learn how to do. But I have been thinking about how great it is in some ways that it's been created space where people can come together across the state and effectively communicate with each other. I don't know if you all can remember, but it feels like forever ago when you were on those terrible conference calls and people were talking over each other and trying to get in, and there wasn't a chat. And so, it totally has advanced us in that way. I would also agree with you that what a leveling playing field it's been to allow people to publicly testify, and they don't have to end up down there, right? They don't have to go and wait hours and hours before it's their turn, the childcare, the food. We've been trying to push our local government to say, if the DMV could text you when it's your turn in like a reverse texting program, so can the Air Commission or the Water Commission, that there are steps we can take to build upon that. And then my last takeaway from what you said was just the language access, because wow, we've been able to save chats, record dually videos in English and Spanish at the same time. We've even, in our efforts for environmental justice, we've even pushed into a third language. We've done some in Somali and in Vietnamese and Spanish and English. And so it provides a whole new way for us all to engage that, yes, we could have done in person, but it is a new task or a new skill for us. So Paula, how about you?
Yeah, no, thank you so much, Elida. I think I relate a lot to your response in terms of putting communities first and listening to the community's needs and how they would like to see this transition happen. And I think my answer to the hurdles is that it's so daunting. It's so daunting when you drive down to South Los Angeles, Houston, and all of these areas that are plagued by petrochemicals, oil wells, and there's fields and fields of these environmental hazards that are placed next to communities. And then you start thinking, what are we going to do with this? What are we going to do with this land? What's going to happen to this land, and how are we going to repurpose it? And I think about, this being a full-on hardcore obstacle, because I think communities who have long stand and being impacted by oil pollution deserve reparations and remediations for the environmental health and trauma that they face because of big oil. And I think for that, we need to think about what's going to happen and how are we going to do this transition and phase out, cleaned up, and replacement of land uses, so communities can say how they want this land to be repurposed and redeveloped. And I think this is an opportunity to reclaim what previously was polluted and transform it into something that can create community benefits, green spaces, healthy food, affordable housing, as well as clean air. But this is a hurdle in itself, because we must think about what a proper cleanup looks like and how we can address the harms done and the legacy contamination. And that's a big obstacle. But I think this phase out is pushing towards a just transition of thinking about what clean production looks like, what cleanup best practices can look like, innovative technologies, implementations that can support communities at the front lines and also workers. And I think that also finding the right approach to embrace the principles of environmental justice and economic justice, as we need bold leadership to ensure that a phase out will ensure a just transition to clean production, but also healthier jobs. So both frontline workers and communities are protected and provided with opportunities to thrive and being in cleaner environments. And I think for that, it's working directly with communities, being at the table, at the decision-making table, and embracing those principles of environmental justice and precautionary measures. And as we're thinking about frontline communities, that is also workers. And I think, as we are facing big oil, this is like the biggest fight, like of the David and Goliath, like jobs and health, when we can have both. But for that, again, we need bold leadership. And I think that that's one of the biggest hurdles, right? Elected officials that need to step up the game and stop receiving money from big oil, and just thinking about how we can start transitioning away from harmful practices and environmental health harm. Yeah, so that's what I'll say in terms of hurdles. And I guess I also relate to what Elida said in terms of engagement. The COVID-19 pandemic absolutely has trumped a lot of engagement efforts, but I think also communities have come to the front of learning how to use social media, learning how to use Zoom. We've had so many trainings around how to use Zoom, how to set up your email with community members so that we can stay in touch and communicating constantly. But I think because this is such a big issue in Los Angeles, communities have come to the table to talk about to talk about and be at the decision making place of what's going to happen next and how their communities are going to be impacted. And so yeah, I think that those are the hurdles, and continuing to organize, to outreach, to work directly with labor, with economic justice organizations is what we can do to sort of overcome these hurdles.
Yeah, what I really heard there too is the digital divide that was exposed so terribly during COVID. And when I hear you talking about helping people set up their emails and things, I mean, that is so critical. We saw that for our students. As I've thought about answering this question and we prepared for this, I thought of a lot of things, right? We continue to run into resources, not having the scientists or the lawyers or the attorneys to be able to do the work that we need to do so we can be sure, like you were saying, that we are making the best decisions whenever kind of rulemaking it is, and explaining it in common terms back to our communities. And what I found during the pandemic, in particular, the racial upheaval that has continued and the reckoning that has continued, we've seen a lot of groups go through basic diversity and equity training. And now they want to work with us even more. And so trying to find that balance of being able to make time for individuals and partnerships that bring us those experts, right? There are other not larger NGOs that may have the attorneys or the lawyers or whatever. But what I've encountered in the last 3 years, and we've had to push through, is that when push comes to shove, the larger ups in those companies are willing to trade away our interests at critical decision-making points so that they can keep their favor, so they can get another bill introduced, so that they can make sure that they get invited to the party. I'm not sure what goes through all of their decision-making, but how many times are we going to get burned before we recognize that these companies and these people aren't trading our interests? And so when we've reached those critical points and, a large group calls me and says, I'd really love to sign on to your letter if you would just change these 9 things. Don't sign the letter. That's okay. You don't have to sign the letter. We can continue going on our own. And we've had some huge success passing. For example, we took on our biggest infrastructure bill, and we led a coalition of over 30 orgs over 10 days that nearly killed a $5 billion bill and created an environmental justice office and so many other things. And guess what? Some of those players that would trade us at the end, they were left on the outside, and they hate it. They hate being on the outside. They want to be at the table. That is their entire theory of change. And so we have to reset the table to benefit our people. And I think COVID has really just impressed upon me that our community is saying now or never. When you're seeing the deaths resulting from the PM 2.5 particles, and you know that your mother lives there, your grandmother lives there, your friends live there in those communities, there's no time for changing 9 words in a letter anymore. And so, that's my answer. Those are the hurdles I've dealt with. And what I have to say is you have to be able to tell them no, and that we can continue to work together in the future, but not if we're going to continue working in the same paradigm, because we can't do that. So Yaritza, I understand we might have the tech figured out here for you and your audio. So can you hear us?
Let's see. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you, which is so great. We're only a couple questions in, so we're going to start by, you just talk about yourself, the projects you're working on, the hurdles you're facing. And I might actually have you pivot to the next question. I think it all fits together about what you're doing to involve and inspire people, because I see your videos. I see your videos on Facebook, and I'm like, man, if only I was in Florida, I'd be there helping, because you're doing great work.
Come visit. Come visit. The door is open. So some of the things that we're working on here, so Montclair, we're working on a lot of solutions and to equitably protect the health of families from the impacts of air pollution and climate change, right? At the federal level, we're working to further strengthen the Environmental Protection Agency's proposed oil and gas methane rules. Methane is a main component of natural gas that accelerates climate change. Wherever oil and gas operations leak methane, other harmful pollutants are getting out too, right? And that kind of stuff can affect the health of those living closest to it. But due to high levels of poverty, low levels of health insurance, and lack of adequate health care, Latinos are often disproportionately burdened by the climate and the health impacts of methane and the air pollution. Whew. So with all that said, not like we don't already know that anyways, but we're literally living in the areas, we're learning in those areas, we're working in those same environments that are toxic and harmful to our lungs. Nationally, we're close to 2 million Latinos living within a half a mile of oil and gas facilities. Aquí in Florida, we don't have a lot of oil and gas operations, but we do see the impacts of climate change caused by greenhouse gases like methane. Floridians are experiencing climate impacts with sea level rise, more flooding, especially here in Orlando, which we really don't hear about a lot, right? But severe storms, hurricanes, and it's a costly recovery for us. A lot of times here in Florida, we don't talk about all that kind of devastation because we cater so much to the tourism and to the economic help that we get from all those folks that come to visit, right? But what we need to do is focus on cutting methane because it's one of the fastest ways we can fight climate change to protect the health of families that live here. It's really important. And one of my things that I want to do is like to invite you to make your voice heard. I never would have thought 10 years ago, 5 years ago, that I'd be calling EPA and calling in, to tell them what I feel and how it's affecting me and my family here in Florida. I would have never guessed to do that, but it's very empowering. It's powerful to do that, and I invite all of you to do that. Our voices are so important, especialmente los Latinos, because there's so many of us. Let's see, you wanted to find out about some of the hurdles that we're facing here too, right? Some of the communities that are most impacted by climate and air pollution are low-income communities who can't afford that transition from fossil fuel dependency on their own. And that's why it's so important that we talk about the ways that we can move forward as a country towards that energy equity, so that communities who are impacted the most by air pollution and climate change are not also burdened by the unaffordable energy costs that come with it.
Yeah,
Keep going.
I would agree with you 100%. I mean, in our work, in all of our work around electrification and the transition, you hear down payment assistance is so critically important. This conversation about tax credits and the idea that you can just take it off at the end of the year isn't enough. We hear that over and over and over again, that small businesses, small community members, we all deserve to have some down payment assistance, pay up so that we can make the transition and help our health. So Yaritza, I was alluding to the fact that you make lots and lots of videos. I know you use social media. But what other tactics do you use to inspire and bring people into the movement for yourself?
Tactics. Let's see. So Moms Network, we drive change by advocating for regulations and the laws that protect the family from air pollution, climate change, and environmental injustice, while at the same time, we're moving away from fossil fuel dependency, right? So what we do is we organize moms to meet with policymakers. We participate in public hearings, like I was talking about. We submit comments to public dockets. All of that stuff is super important. We have petitions. We do calls for actions through traditional media outlets. Like I would have never, ever imagined myself having an op-ed, and I've already had 2 outgoing there. I'm looking to get some more published in the future. That's a lot of power out there. What we know the most powerful leverage for change is those personal stories, like I was saying. And it's about how it affects the people that are impacted by that air pollution, the climate change, and all those injustices that come with it. Moms Clean Air Force helps to ensure these stories make it to the policymakers to direct change and protections for our families. At the local level, in my hometown of Orlando, Florida, worked with community members and our little coalition and lawmakers to put pressure on the Orlando Utility Commission so that they can move forward with a plan to transition from fossil fuel power plants away from coal towards solar and energy storage solutions. That's huge. Like, we're in the sunshine state. Why are we not using more solar? So, like, how amazing is it that I get to be a part of that move, that transition? Like, I'm like, Dale, why don't we gente? You know what I'm saying? And it's about that communication, having those cafecitos and sitting down with my community members, with my neighbors. As a matter of fact, 2 days ago, one of my neighbors sent me an email, and she got like a air monitoring system, put it in her backyard. So I went to have a little cup of coffee, chit chat with my neighbor, and we're just having these powerful conversations about how doing something as simple as that can help literally change the future and the layout of our city here. Like, imagínate if we all did that.
Well, Paula, how about you? Do you have any magic secrets for doing outreach there you might want to share with people?
Yeah, thank you.
It's all about, like, route. Sorry.
Yeah, thank you. I think very similar. Organizing, outreach, paying attention to elections and to elected officials who are pushing for your vision of your community and how they are actually doing it. Following the money, where is the money going and where it's coming from and how it's being utilized in our communities. A lot of the times we hear reparations and all of these, and that ends up in gentrifying. And so how are things actually happening in your community, and being at the forefront of the fight is really important, to ensure decisions are made with us and not for us. I think also very important for PSRLA is organizing and mobilizing the credible voices of physicians and doctors in environmental justice work. I think physicians have the power of connecting with communities through doctors to patients and nurses to patients experiences, and they can translate that into actions and to activism. And physicians can inspire communities to take ownership of their health, understand their health in the context of cumulative impacts, not just, you have diabetes because you ate this note, but the context of in the context of social justice, what is in your surrounding that it's impacting your health, including being exposed daily to pollution burden. But also physicians can also bring accountability to the communities they serve by organizing and mobilizing for environmental justice work. And I think this is a field that it's a little bit untouched, and it has a lot of power with elected officials and how things sort of move in communities. And that's sort of the power that we have with PSRLA, sort of organizing these stakeholders and to advocate on behalf of communities. And I think in terms of advocacy directly with communities, I think is letting communities lead and hearing their voices first. And that means through trainings and through developing platforms that are that have language justice there, that are accessible. It's really important, so that folks can have their voices heard. And that's the most important, whatever it is, whatever solutions. And I think the most important is because communities are the experts in their communities, and they know what the physical needs and and all the needs in their communities, the treasures, the challenges, and what happens and what doesn't happen in their community. And so what we strive to do is to build community scientists, community advocates, radical advocates that understand how their communities, their community vision, and they are the ones that can implement it because that's their community. So I think the power of decision making, it's really important, and all of that together with stakeholders, advocacy, it's how I think the EJ movement and how PSRLA continues to inspire action.
Well, thank you for sharing that. I just want to remind everyone who's watching that you can also put questions in the chat. We're only a couple more questions away from getting to your questions from the audience. And so we're really excited to get those. Leda, is there anything you would like to add about your organizing?
Yeah, like I think about to like how I got started, like what brought me in, right? Like, what drew me in. And I think seeing what's going around in our communities, because like I'm from here. And so I think having that ability to talk to the community and say, like, look, this is what it used to be. Look what's around us now. And, has been really helpful. And then, that language, like bringing it down to the level, because, there's these systemic barriers that are put in place, they're by design. It's not, when there's a permit hearing for a new proposed plant or, fossil fuel build out, like they're not putting that out to the public like, hey, we're going to be building in your communities. Nah, like they don't do that. They come in and they say, we're going to be a good neighbor. Like we're donating this much money to your charity. We're doing this for the schools. We're doing this while we're also like, not paying our taxes and increasing your property taxes. And, you're paying more for your insurance because like now your family members have cancer, or they have asthma, or they have heart disease. And, there's this correlation between COVID and air pollution in our communities. And, the lack of access, not just to the permit hearings, but, to simple things like voting, especially in Texas, where they're making it so difficult for the communities to get involved. So I think like being from here and, seeing the difference and the change and being able to talk to the community and like bring that to the attention and saying like, look, this is your power. This is what they're doing. This is our plan. And we were able to get our hands on ExxonMobil's game plan for the area. And we're like, look, we're not lying. We're not exaggerating on this. Like, this is their plan. They don't want you to know, because the less that you know, the more they're able to take advantage of you. And, they target our areas. They keep these areas, without opportunity because it benefits them. It's not what benefits the communities. It's what benefits them. They're coming in and they're saying, we're going to create jobs for you, and they go and they bring in people from out of the areas because people from here aren't educated and they're not skilled. So they create jobs for people elsewhere. But our communities are the ones paying the price when it comes to our health, when it comes to our taxes, when it comes to, us having to seek jobs elsewhere because there's no opportunity here. And, being able to tie that into like, Bella and Yadisa said, like our educator, and you said it too, and like our political leaders who don't have spines, who aren't pushing back on these fossil fuel industries and saying like, this isn't good for my community. Like, if you want to come here, it's because you want to come here. So why am I like giving you subsidies because this area is attractive to you? Why am I sweetening the deal? And we see that happening. So having those conversations with community and, having that light bulb go off and like saying like, look, this is what's happening. Like it really helps to start, to where they start questioning things. And, it's not because they want to be good neighbors and create opportunities for us. It's because they're taking advantage of the situation that they keep us in. And so that is the conversation that we're having with community. And then like, having those tools, like having like TikTok's big now. I'm personally not on it, but that's something that, we're looking at, creating TikToks of like, look, refineries here, they're emitting this here. We had somebody come to the area and took some photography of like storage tanks and saying like, what we don't see with the naked eye doesn't mean that it's not being emitted. Because look, here are these pictures of what's happening, and like tying it into the questions that I see on Facebook. I mean, I don't go a day without Facebook without seeing somebody who has a GoFundMe because, a family member has cancer or so-and-so died from COVID. And it's just like, why do you think it's affecting our communities? Because of what's around us. And, just tying it in, like these fossil fuel industries, even though they say they create jobs for us, there's better options out there. And we demand those options, because I had the opportunity to go to Germany last summer and, to be a part of a campaign against LNG build out there, because they're not fracking on their land, but they don't mind coming to the global south in our communities and taking this LNG and fracked, gas from here or crude oil from here, because it's like, if it's not healthy for their countries, why is it that they don't care about what's happening in our communities? And, and if it's not happening there, it shouldn't be happening anywhere. So we definitely need to keep it in the ground. And we demand that same thing, because we pay a lot in our taxes too, but they get housing. Somebody retired at 32 and they're on government support because they're like, I paid my taxes. And, rather than like giving money to like all of these government contractors for like the military and all that, we need to be investing in our communities, and then we need to be demanding that. And so those are the conversations that we're having with folks in our areas. Like, we deserve better, and we demand it. So,
well, I think you need to go back to that like 2 minutes ago, and that can be your first TikTok video. And I think we can all agree that I'm on TikTok. I'll be your friend. We'll share it. That's the most important thing that I took away too, right? Is that the sharing and the community empowerment, that's a huge part of it. There's ways to trick these computer algorithms to help each other, and we need to be doing more of that. You know, some of my like tips in the advocacy, you know, we've run a lot of ballot initiatives. We've started to petition for our own rulemakings at these commissions, which is the same as doing a ballot. You're driving the agenda, you're driving that ourselves. And we've successfully have one on the agenda for next year to upgrade protections on our river through the community I grew up in. It's one of the most polluted, certainly in our state, if not in the country. And so I think driving that agenda is really important. I think you all hit on something, which is, let's just take oil and gas in my community. Some of it is regulated by the Oil and Gas Commission, some by the Public Utilities Commission, some by the Water Quality Control Commission, some of it by the Air Quality Control Commission. You have to know how to play 5 different sports to be able to effectively engage in these spaces. And so we need to actively be seeking ways to make them behave the same way, so that their public outreach is the same, so that we can train our community members and civics on how best to engage in their community. You know, when I talk about showing up for these multiple sports, it's just all activism, right? Is showing up. You've been saying it. You have to show up in the spaces. You have to testify. Well, now with online, I've been able to pop into rural water board meetings to hear what people are talking about. Half the time I go to some random board meeting, they say, oh my God, no one's testified here in 2 years. So that goes to show you how powerful your voice would be if we were to take over that space. And we've been able to do that, because taking over the space to them and scaring them is 10 people talking, right? Because they haven't had one person speak to them in 2 years. But I also use that as an opportunity to find allies in the space that people are tuning in. So if I'm testifying for the first time at a commission, you know, I'm Ian Tafoya. I work with Green Latinos. This is what we do. My job is to try to help you get better at reaching my community so the outcomes get better. Here's my email. I get a lot of people contacting me that way. And it helps build relationships in rural communities that we can elevate their voices for a national communication strategy, that we can get to testify, write letters, write op-eds. And then lastly, you know, especially a lot of my state's rural, and so I go travel to the communities. There's a couple of things that I've always been taught to do since I ran for office myself. Read the local newspaper. So as soon as I get to a local community, I pick up that paper and I kind of like to learn what's going on, because then you end up in conversations with people about what's happening in your community. You're able to talk to a reporter in a much more in-depth way, like you know what's going on in that community. And then I like to work from coffee shops, of course, and everybody puts their cards on the wall. And I like to take a look there and say, like, these people wanted to be contacted. So I reach out to them. And, you know, I've gotten a lot of really cool communications and friendships out of meeting people who put their card on a coffee shop wall in a rural part of the country. And so I just really want to encourage people that, again, it's about reaching out. That's my tip. My tip is show up and reach out. Put your hand out there and see if it gets me back there, because it has a lot, and it has a lot to do with the success that we've had here in Colorado. We have one more kind of final question here, and I think we've all kind of touched on it, especially you, Aaliyah, that if these jobs are so good, why is it that our communities that they're in have such high poverty rates? If these jobs are so good, why are we paying such high costs for medical care in these communities? If these jobs are so good, why aren't brown people becoming managers in these programs, and instead they're only doing the dangerous jobs in the oil and gas sector? It's something that we see over and over again. And what I think we have to target is the industry has had, they get to talk about people. They're the only ones that get to control people, right? It's like, think about how this is impacting people and the lost jobs. But our narrative is taking back people as well. The gente that it's impacting. And for me in particular, I testify a lot. You know, when you testify in these big hearings and there's 500 people on there, a lot of those people are supposed opponents. But it's your opportunity to talk to them, to tune into them, because they're waiting their turn. And what I tell them is nobody wants austerity. Nobody wants to shut this down. And now you have to fire your police officers or your firefighters or your teachers, right? There has to be a way for us to find new economic opportunity for you. And that, again, we want to work with you together on that. So, Paula, how about we go to you next to just talk about strategies you've had in talking to people about just transition?
Yeah, thank you. I think again, it's a daunting question, but I think so. One thing is just that phasing out oil drilling in Los Angeles is an opportunity to create good jobs, develop spaces that can benefit communities, and can spur local economic development. But for that to happen, Los Angeles must hold oil companies accountable for their legal responsibility to properly plug and clean up their oil wells. And that's going to take cleanup. So cleaning up oil wells and remediating the land will take lots of jobs, lots of them. And this work means important and meaningful employment for workers inside and outside of the oil industry to help Los Angeles turn a new leaf towards healthier and cleaner future. And so that's why the Stand Delay campaign is urging the city to create a plan to support oil workers in their transition to safer jobs with greener long-term stability and equivalent payment in their industries that they currently have. And while the oil and gas industry is rapidly declining and it's increasingly volatile right now, we need city leaders and national leaders and state leaders to hold big oil accountable for pensions promised to their workers and pave the way towards transitioning our economy and workers away from fossil fuels and how that would look like. But creating this plan now rather than waiting until the next oil company goes bankrupt is important because that way we can protect and prepare oil workers and their families for a thriving future. So I think that, again, embracing the environmental justice principles with economic justice principles is really key to ensuring a just transition. Thank you.
Yeah, Rita, you want to jump in there? I saw you snapping, so I feel like you wanted to say some more there.
Nah, man, she's like all on it. Like everything that she was said is so right. I mean, yes. I'm just trying to clap her full head. Yes, preach.
Lita, would you like to add anything else to the just transition conversation?
Well, yeah, I mean, these jobs in the fossil fuel industries, I mean, they're not going to be infinite. This source is finite, so it's not a question of like, how is it going to, it's like when, and, we need this now, like we needed this a decade ago. And for every one job that they create in the oil field, you get 4 clean energy jobs. And, it's not a lie that oil and gas is moving towards automation. And so we already have a skilled workforce that knows like what it's like to work in a field or work offshore or, for like offshore wind projects or, clean energy projects. We need to have jobs where people aren't walking into work and thinking like, is there going to be an explosion? Unfortunately, I lost my cousin in 2005 at the BP explosion in Texas City, and she was a secretary. So it's like, these jobs, like they affect the communities, they affect families like long term. And so it's like we need a transition to these clean energy jobs that aren't going to affect our health and where somebody doesn't go home and say like, oh, I don't know what chemicals I'm working with, but I'm going home to my family now and whatever I have on me, I'm now passing on to them. Like, so it's workers have the power. And, it's about like letting them know, like there's these opportunities here for you and these are long term and they're not going to hurt our environment. And, it's about job creation and sustainability and, divesting away from that. One last thing, like we had conversations in the past, right, about carbon taxes and, we needed to tax like these big emitters in our industries, like, like who carbon taxes, but now they've been able to shift that conversation to carbon capture and hydrogen. And it's like now, but they require billions of dollars of subsidies. And it's like, if we can give billions of dollars of subsidies into these multi-billion-dollar corporations, why can't we invest in our communities and, holding our government officials accountable to that? So.
Yes. Girl, I love it. Dude, I'm sorry. I didn't realize I muted myself. Yes, and it's so true. What's also important is to be able to get down with our neighbors within our communities and talk to one another. I mean, I know that for me to learn things in Spanish, it takes me like I need to repeat it. And that's when I started to realize that, oh my God, this must be what must be like for mommy when she's reading stuff in English. You know, where you comprehend it, but you don't get everything, all the details that we really need. For me, I'm not going to make a decision for myself, my career, or my family unless if I fully understand everything that comes with it. I don't want to put myself or my family's health at risk on top of that. We're already getting by. So, like, what's important is to have those conversations, to get that information translated. And if they don't, the company, for some reason, they don't have it, there's a way. There's plenty of us that know Spanish, and there's resources out there for us. Like, for example, reach out, find your local mom's rep and see how we can get translated. We link up with Green Latinos and all of our partners throughout all of these networks and organizations that we with, these coalitions that have translators. If we don't have it in Spanish, we'll get it for you in Portuguese. You know what I'm saying? Like, you need something else, you need it in French or Creole, let's get it. You know what I'm saying? Like, that's so important. We have power in numbers. So it's all about getting out into the community, having these little cafecitos and these chit chats, and finding out what that need is, what their concerns are, and getting that information out to these big corporations, to our policymakers. And once you put like a little bit of pressure, I'm gonna say right now, we had Darren Soto here in Orlando, we have Kathy Castor out in Tampa, and we put pressure on them and we put them to work, and they are making some really diesel chases here in the state of Florida. It's so exciting. It's also a little frustrating considering how colorful this state is, right? But what's important is that they hear our voices. And some representatives are all about it. What's important is that we're not focusing on who's red, who's blue. Let's focus on green, right? We're Green Latinos. Isn't that what we're here for? So let's make sure that we keep it facing that. It doesn't matter what their personal views are on those things. It's important to our kids' future. That's what at the end of the day what I want to talk about. So let's get those translations out there. I know that each one of our speakers have talked about it and we touched on it over the last 3 days. Like, it's just, that's something that we're hearing literally on all fronts across the country. Those are concerns. We all have similar concerns. We also have similar resources. So it's like Captain Planet, right? Let's all join our forces and like, let's get this done. We can do so much. Imagínate what's going to be like next year when we link up again.
All right, y'all, I've been taking notes like crazy. All of this information has been so juicy and inspiring, and I'm getting a lot of good idea energy. I just want to take the last 5 minutes for some of the audience Q&A. We're probably not going to be able to get to all the questions, but I do want to acknowledge that. There's one question for Elida. Specifically, can you put into context how much water, oil, gas, and petrochemicals need, and where do they want to take the water from? I heard there are issues with boil water notices in Corpus. So is Corpus having water security issues? If you can respond to that.
Yeah. So we don't really know how much these petrochemical industries need because that's kind of kept under wraps. We know from the one Exxon Sabic or Gulf Coast Growth Ventures that they use 20 million gallons of water per day to produce plastic nurdles that they then ship to China. But one of the proposed fossil desalination plants is going to take 33 billion gallons of water per year from our bay, which is a closed bay system. It's important to the ecosystem in our area. This is where, a lot of the fish nurseries are, seabeds are there, which help us when there's a hurricane. Corpus is notorious for boil water notices. And there's no confidence that they can't even keep our drinking water clean. How can they run a desalination plant? But we know that what they're trying to do is they're trying to get the permit, and then they're going to get the permit and sell it to a third party. That's their whole intention. So, and then also become wholesalers of, this public resource, which is our bay, which is, what is our lifeline. This is the heart of the coastal bend. Our coast is why people come here. And, if we kill that, then that's what industry wants. They want this area for themselves and not for the people. So yeah, and the proposed cost that they're seeing, it's they're trying to get a loan for $800 million. What we're seeing is desalination plants cost upwards of $2 billion to have one with all the bells and whistles that they're saying. So they're not even being truthful with the cost on that and what they're going to do with the sludge after, with this, after they desalinate the water. That sludge is going to be thrown back into the bay because they don't want to pay extra to take the salt out from there. So it's a problem.
Yeah. I think there's a huge amount of issues with just keeping information secret to the public. And that's a lot of our work, is pushing on trying to make information public. It's exhausting, but that's really the baseline step to even understand and empower ourselves. A question for Yaritza. What needles have you been able to move in Florida with regard to carbon pollution in the last 2 years during the current and last administration? Do you want to answer? We just have a couple minutes.
Let's see. Actually, we've done a lot of work here in Central Florida in getting that coal power plant. First, they were committing to like, oh yeah, we'll shut it down. Like, no, we got them to within our coalition. We got them to agree to shut it down way ahead of schedule. They're in the process of doing that right now and shutting it down. It's right next to a very, very nice, prominent part of Central Florida. And I think that's how we were talking about earlier. Until it started to really affect those nice neighborhoods is when people really started to make us think about it. Because like after it's been devastating all these other low-income brown communities, now it started to really affect everybody, and that's when it really started to take off here in Central Florida. But that's not an issue that we only face here in Orlando. They've got the same problem going out there in the Tampa area. But lucky for us, we have Kathy, like I was talking about earlier, and so she's been putting a lot of pressure on the Utilities Commission out there. So we've got, it's across the state, we have small little wins like that are slowly starting to snowball. Maybe we didn't get a lot of momentum at first because people were just kind of trying to figure themselves out with everything happening over the last 2 years. But getting us to be able to get Stanton to agree to shut that down, and not only shutting down that power plant, but now installing a whole solar farm. And like, we're the Sunshine State. The fact that we're not using more solar here is like, it still baffles me. But it's baby steps, right? We're working on that and getting that set up. And once we can start getting some of these big companies do that, it's only a matter of time before they're making it easy and more affordable for some of those low-income families that may not have been able to get solar on their own, with them shutting down a power plant, implementing solar panels, and making it way more affordable with programs for some of those families who really need it and would benefit from it the most without getting the burden of the cost on top of that. Like, we're already paying with it with our health. Now we have to pay it with money, and now I have to pay with it with kids. Like, now while I'm working here, so like, it's just across the board. And just so you know, we're not doing it only here in Florida. This is across the country. There's an Eco Madre, somebody near you or somebody that you know. So it's a matter of just reaching out and getting that correct information. Thank you, Karim.
Gracias. I'm going to turn it over to Ian to kind of give him the last word and close it out.
Well, yeah, we just want to say thank you so much again to everybody. All these fights from upstream to midstream to downstream to shipping to plastics, there's so much impacting our communities. I did have a fact that I knew about fracking wells, at least where I'm from. It's 4 million gallons of water per well. And in the last 2 years, under our environmental Democrat governor, Jared Polis, they've approved 4,000 new wells. So you can imagine. And Colorado and the West and the plains in general are facing multi-decade mega drought, right? That's what NASA's telling us. And so you can see how 4 million gallons can go a long way to feed people, to get water to homes. But instead it's being sunk into the ground and exacerbating the problem. And so there's just some perspective for you all. We could do a session like this every single day because there are so many voices that are fighting back against the fossil fuel industry. And we can't forget the huge amount of missing and murdered Indigenous women that are directly related to this fossil fuel industry. That alone could be hours of long documentaries about how inappropriate that is. But these man camps and this exploration are connected. And I think men in particular, we need to be saying it more, that this is a problem that are facing our community, and a lot of Indigenous elder tell me that we need to be saying it more and standing collectively together more. Now, I want to make sure you all know that there's great music to close out our summit, and there's going to be networking. Of course, not as good as the live music and dancing that we would all normally have, but we have to make the best with what we have. And so I'm looking forward to seeing everybody there on the networking sessions.
Thank you, everyone. Really, really appreciate it. And yeah, let's keep going. Let's keep working together and keep the energy up. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Gracias. Ciao.